Okay, a warning. The stories and the content today comes directly from conversations with real people, and some of the content might be a little bit triggering for some listening. There's a range of stories, there's life experiences, and some of it's not always the easiest to hear. Okay, thanks. Lesson 1. Don't be a dick. Lesson 2. Learn to love yourself. Lesson 3. Don't be a dick. Lesson 4. Listen to what people are saying to you. Lesson 5. Trust your instinct. Lesson 6. Don't be a dick. Lesson 7. I'll always love you just the way you are. Lesson 8. You are allowed to be wrong. Lesson 9. You are so much stronger than you think you are. Lesson 10. Don't be a dick. Welcome to Extraordinary Stories Podcast. Okay, hi, how are you? Are you well? Are you good? I am. Okay, this is episode 50 and it's a special episode. I'll get to that in a second. And what that's going to involve, let me just do the shout outs. There's just a couple. So, first shout out, Beth Warner. Hello, Beth. Thank you for listening. Your gorgeous fiancé, Jack, got in touch to ask for a shout out. So, Beth and Jack, hello. Thanks for listening. Alistair Flanagan, thank you too for listening to the podcast. And that's it. I'm keeping it short. For this episode, I reached out a while ago now, and I asked people to come to me and have a dialogue with me about the following: love, loss, and lessons. And I didn't just pick them all because they started with the letter L. I promise. I'm looking at these big concepts for myself in my own life, and without sounding like a wanker, sometimes you can really only tackle the big concepts like love, loss, and lessons if you can see them in a really focused way, in a really real way. And, well, you, as always, were incredible with what you brought to me. I'm not going to go on for too much longer. I'm just going to get on with it and let you hear what people had to say. So, as well as conversations, I conducted interviews and I reached out on social media with the big questions about love, loss, and learning. Okay, let's go. One of the first people to get in contact with me was Janet. And Janet writes this to me. She says, "Hi Barry. I felt like I needed to share this with you when you asked about love loss and lessons. She goes on to tell me, I was in bed many years ago now, and having decided we wanted to have a baby, me and my husband were lying in bed almost falling asleep. She adds this, which makes me laugh. You can probably imagine what me and my husband had done a few hours earlier. Yes, I can. She goes on to say, I felt the conception of my first child. I was trying to get to sleep, and as I was lying there, I felt this warmth spread through my lower abdomen. She says it took me by complete surprise. In her mind, she remembers thinking the words warmth, golden, and magic. She says, I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that I had conceived a child, and what I had felt was its soul entering my body. She says, I just knew this was the case. I was hearing what my body was telling me. And in fact, now she was pregnant. So her and her husband were delighted. This was all that they wanted. At 10 weeks along into Janet's pregnancy, she lost the baby. She says, of course, we were devastated. And then she asked this question, which is, there's no answer for this, it's impossible. She says, why would I feel conception only to lose it? After the loss, they kept trying, and within a month and a half, she fell pregnant again. Pregnant with her now 18-year-old daughter, Michaela. She then went on to have another child, 14-year-old Kirsten. Now, one day, when Kirsten was 3 years old, she was playing at Janet's feet and she was facing away from Janet at this point. Now, the 3-year-old was having a very serious discussion with someone who wasn't there. So, of course, Janet's thinking, who is this invisible person that she's talking to? And she assumes that the 3-year-old's thinking it's her older sister, Michaela. She's thinking she's having a conversation with her sister who's not in the room. But the 3-year-old turns round to her and she says, it's not Michaela, I'm talking to Jordan. Janet goes completely silent and she listens to her 3-year-old daughter talk to the invisible Jordan. Now, what that 3-year-old could never have known is that baby from all those years ago that Janet lost was going to be named Jordan. She says in that moment she understood that when she lay in that bed having conceived that baby and she felt the words golden, magic and warmth, it was because Jordan is real. She says Jordan is real. She's watching over my children. I didn't lose her at all. And she ends by saying, I just wanted to share that, as I've never before heard anyone describe the exact feeling that I had in that moment, and it was real. Thank you, Janet. Thank you for sending me that. Janet sent me that as I was on my way to work one day. It was like 9 o'clock in the morning, and I opened it in an email on a train, and I just literally sat there like crying at this email It just totally, it just caught me completely off guard. I didn't know what it was. I just opened it and I read it and I was like, I'm just reading through it. The next thing you know, I'm like, crying on the train. I'm like, what? That's a great look when you're going to work in the morning. Great look. Okay, so I reached out as part of the research for this episode across all of my social media, and I asked this question: what is the best or the worst advice that you have ever received? Now, given that a lot of lessons in life come in the form of advice, what's that thing is it the Baz Luhrmann Sunscreen song? Do you know the Sunscreen song where he's like, class of 73 or whatever? There's a line in it that's really nice about don't throw away the advice of your elders. No. What is it? Oh fuck, I've got this totally confused. It's advice is a form of nostalgia. That's what he says in that. I'm sorry, I described that really badly. But yes, so you can decide for yourself in this list of 10 that I'm going to give you which came under the good or the bad advice category. Okay, number 1 on the advice. The words of Maya Angelou when she said, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Number 2, never drink in a pub with a flat roof. Number 3, all you need to make a relationship work is friendship and respect. Number 4, always overpay a good babysitter and overtip a good waitress. Number 5, you can spank the autism out of your child. Number 6, carpe diem, seize the day. Number 7, if you can't get it up, don't force it. You'll only get frustrated with yourself. Number 8, you shouldn't read so much. Girls who read books grow brains, not breasts. And no man wants a woman for her brain. Oh. Number 9, never trust someone who says they don't like dogs. Number 10, try in your life to be less like a machine gun and more like a rifle. Okay, so a fucking crazy mix of advice going on there. Honestly, the things that come out of some people's mouths, I'm like, what the actual hell possesses a person to say some of these things? Okay, please don't, this is a disclaimer, please don't try and live your life by any of the 10 things that I just listed on that advice list, because yeah, you could be in for some trouble. Okay, the next moment in love, loss and lessons is Natalie. Natalie writes to me and she says, at the time of writing, I'm 26 years old. She says, my dad left when I was 3. I'm unsure of the complete circumstances. I don't know if I've ever really been told the truth. But as I grew up, I became very easily played by men. The first time I had sex with a man, it wasn't completely consensual. She says, when I say that, I don't want anyone to think that I hold hatred for the man in question. He was a good friend, we were drunk, and I didn't say no. But I was scared and I didn't enjoy it. And I think somewhere in the back of my mind, I wanted him to stop. But I also just didn't want him to hate me, so I let it happen. She says, after that, I just spiraled out of control with love. I fell for every bad boy every time. I was very promiscuous for a long time, and I was seeking the worst kind of attention over and over. She says, oh, there were some wankers along the way. Oh, tell me about it. I get it. I think we all do. She says, I've had some great sex and some terrible sex, and I was never shy about expressing myself, so it wasn't all bad. Around 16, she began to realise that actually she was finding women very attractive. But it wasn't until she was 19 and she'd gone to university that she came out as bisexual. She says, at university, I fell in love in my first year with someone who didn't have the same feelings for me, and I stayed in love for the next couple of years. She then met a partner when she was 21. We'll call the partner Lottie. Natalie says, we spent 18 months together, and in that time she's taught me so much about what it means to be loved, and that being loved doesn't mean that you have to do anything a person wants just to please them. She taught me what making love really meant. For a variety of reasons, it didn't work out, but Natalie will always be grateful for that experience. So, now she meets her second long-term girlfriend, who she's now engaged to. We'll call her Frankie. So lots of people at the time said to Natalie, and I'm sure you've been here before yourself, because yeah, I've definitely been here before as well, where people go, oh, it's just a rebound relationship, don't get into it, you're not really ready for it, you're not emotionally ready to get into something else, you've just, you've lost a partner that you had and whatever, and you're just not quite ready. But she felt she was ready. And they are still together 5 years on and engaged. But Natalie says this has been a tricky relationship, to say the least. We are completely and utterly fundamentally different people to one another. Frankie and I, we've wanted to make it work no matter what, sometimes beyond the point of reason. We've fought and we've fought. We've compromised and we've worked bloody hard. There's been tears, heartbreaks, mistakes, and so many near misses along the way. But we've overcome these challenges time and time again. We've grown up together. This kind of love is the type I find hard to find. We can be a bloody nightmare or a bloody dream. But we're a team. I think there's something there in Natalie's experience of understanding who you are when you are 19, 20, 21 and deciding that you have to now work with that. You have to now live your life, that you've worked that out. You've worked out something about yourself that now you know it. You can't unknow it. You have to change your life. You have to make changes. You have to go with it. I also think there's something there about relationships that's just so interesting in that feeling of often maybe the biggest relationship that you have in your life comes after a period of loss with someone else where you actually were maybe just never ready in the first place to be in the thing you were in. And so actually you had to go through a bit of that loss to just actually understand that the next time you feel that love or you get that love, you're not going to lose it. That's what I really got from Natalie's story, is that actually she lost someone who she was so in love with, but the next time around she fell deeper, she fell harder, but she also did that thing that I recognise from so many relationships, which is you, at that point, you sink your teeth in and you say, this is, whatever happens here, I'm not going to let this one go. Like, this is, I've been there already. I've done that before. I don't know if that makes any sense, but in my head, I can kind of make sense of it. We're going to stay with Natalie for a second, because in amongst the things that she sent me, she also sent me a piece of writing, and the piece of writing I opened first, actually, before I read the remainder of the email. And the piece of writing was called "The Outfit I Will Never Wear Again." And this is where Natalie's very positive story of going through loss in one relationship but discovering love in another takes a slightly more difficult turn. This was written directly after an experience that she had with a male co-worker. So after a few years of Natalie being in her "we can be a bloody nightmare" or "we can be a bloody dream" relationship with the woman that she's engaged to, Natalie has an absolutely horrible experience while she's working. She says, "I was working with a man whom I had become a close friend to. Now, they'd been away on several work trips together, and that involved, as these things always do, hours and hours spent with someone. Long car journeys, or, sometimes you get that sort of thing with like people you work with where you're like, I'm actually spending more time with you than I actually am spending with my partner, because quite often that's just the way work life goes. And so through that relationship of work, she'd opened up to him about a lot of things that had happened in her past. He knew that Natalie's dad had gone away at a young age. He knew that her first sexual experience was with a man, and it wasn't a great experience. While they were away on a work trip, knowing all of this, he took advantage of Natalie really badly. She says she isn't sure how she ended up in the position, whether it was the overindulgence of alcohol or possibly something more sinister. But when she realised what had happened, the worst realisation is that she could do nothing about it. She was miles from home with no transport. They had one car between them and he had the keys. She'd been unconscious, or at least deeply, deeply asleep at the time when he took advantage, and she had no marks on her. There was not a physical mark on her body to prove what had happened. So when she came out of this deep sleep, this slightly unconscious state, she got up and she immediately went for a shower. She says, ultimately, I was left knowing that the only thing I had to prove, what I knew had happened, was my word against his. She says the best case scenario, in her opinion, is that she's either going to be branded a liar, crazy, or a slut. Natalie dealt with it by getting herself out of the situation, but, and I love this, not before telling him that if she ever caught whisper of anything like it happening again, she would come crawling out of the woodwork with her story. She left the job and she moved on in her life. The outfit I will never wear again. I burned the jumper because he touched the sleeve as I clambered out of the car. I shredded the jeans because he put his hand on my thigh whilst he was driving. I threw the shirt in the bin because when I got back into the house, the bile tore up in my throat and poured down the front. It was my favourite shirt. I never thought Faith, as sure as the one I had for him, could be abused like that. I thought there was some kind of rule. I will never wear that outfit again because it reminds me that it's my fault. I drank too much. I will never wear that outfit again because it reminds me that it's my fault. I shouldn't dress like that. I will never wear that outfit again because it reminds me that it's my fault. I owed him something for his time. But this is what I will do. I will wear a new outfit. I will wear a t-shirt with the words, "I am not yours," printed in big letters. I will wear a smile that screams, "You had no right." And I will make sure that my eyes are dressed in, "No, it's not my fault." And I will make sure that other girls, other women, they find their new outfits too. There's nothing wrong with throwing away that outfit. There's nothing wrong with burning it and screaming. There's nothing wrong with taking the smallest piece of it, one piece at a time, and throwing it to the wind and letting it blow into another world. But you will put on a new outfit. You'll not have to walk alone and naked in the world because I will show you something new. Something as beautiful and unique and perfect as you. And we'll join hands with every other woman who can never wear their favourite shirt again. I will never wear that outfit again, but I will drink again. I will dress how I damn please. And I will never owe anyone a single thing. And we will go on together. She ends by saying, "I've never told anyone who it was, where it happened, or any of the details. And I don't know if that makes me a coward, and I'm sorry if it does." No, Natalie, I don't think it makes you a coward in any way. I think it shows strength. I think a lesson in life, as cheesy as it sounds, it's about being in that person's shoes, in that moment. Give it the context. You understand where that person is in their life, how they've got to that moment in their life. I mean, I get this all the time, and you'll have heard it in so many of the stories I've told you. I get so frustrated sometimes because I'm like, why did that person not report that this was going on? Why did that police officer not get there quicker? But there is the little voice in the back of my head that's always going, yeah, but you're not in their shoes, really. So yes, you can judge. You can think you're looking at it objectively. You can think you're understanding it, but actually, until you're there in that moment, I mean, sometimes there's just massive fuck ups where you go, that was really obvious and you missed it. But there's other moments where that's not as black and white, and that's a really grey area. And I think that what I would take from that story as a life lesson is there were choices to be made in that, and if you've made the choice that you're going to walk away from that moment and you're going to just move on with your life, that was your choice. And please don't ever use the word coward when describing that choice. Okay, question time again. Again, I put it out there. What have you lost and never found again? Number 1, my willingness to settle. Number 2, my gives a fuck. I used to care what people thought, now I couldn't give a single fuck. Hell yes. Number 3, the piece of my heart that died when I lost my grandfather 2 years ago. Number 4, a pinky ring from when I was helping my brother build a wall. I'm convinced it's cemented into that wall. Number 5, my high school sweetheart. 6, trust in my own mother. 7, my wedding dress and photos. 8, my young and cool. It's been replaced by middle-aged and menopausal. 9, my teenage years. 10, my recipe for caramel pie. Okay, let's move to what I'm going to call a conversation with Bill. So Bill is, well, he was one of the lecturers I had many, many years ago when I studied. And I always got on really well with him. Now, I think I probably only had about 6 or 7 classes with him over the entire time that I studied. But Bill's a lecturer at Glasgow University and he teaches aesthetics. And I don't know what it was. He's one of these, like, he's quite a well-known figure around the university. Like, everyone knows, oh, it's Big Bill. Like, he's a really larger-than-life kind of fun guy. He can be quite serious. He's fiercely political. But I just always seemed to get on really well with him. I don't know what it was. Even though we didn't really have that many classes together, I just sort of connected with him. I always quite liked him. And so every time I would meet him, we'd have a chat. So when I was doing this episode, I thought, he kept coming into my mind. And I thought, maybe I should reach out to Bill and see if he's got anything worth offering for this episode. He's kind of one of these, like someone in life who you don't need to necessarily have spent a long time with them, but just the short experiences you've had with that person, you kind of just make a connection with them, and yeah, something in the two of you just sort of connects. He's like I said, he's a really fierce, really passionate, and some will say a little intimidating, but I've always really liked him. Bill's just one of these people you look at and you think, you've lived a life, you've got a story, come on, what is it? And so I think that's maybe why he kept coming in to my mind. So he's currently 56 years old. Now he's still absolutely at the top of his field. He's a real academic. He's a very, very well respected man. He's one of these people who'll stand up for anything that he thinks is wrong. He'll be the first to say that situation is not being dealt with properly. That person is completely out of line. He's one of these. He's a really good guy in life. So I reach out to him and I say, okay, I'm doing an episode. It's about love, loss, lessons. I give him a little bit of information about the podcast, and he says, "Aye, great, yeah, let's do it. Let's have a chat. He's like, I'm not committing to anything, but we'll go and have a chat." So it's like, okay, great. So we went to a wee pub in Glasgow called The Chip, which is in the West End. This was Bill's choosing. So it's a nice little pub. Luckily they happen to sell one of my favourite ciders, which is good for me, and a wide range of whiskies, which is I know that to be his drink. It's a popular kind of little hangout for lots of people really who live in the West End. Lots of university types and all that kind of hang about it. Lots of what would get termed West End wankers might go into it. Bill's not a West End wanker. I'm not a West End wanker. But you do get quite a lot of them in there. It's almost like people who are like trying on what it's like to live in the West End. Rather than actually just being people who live there, going about their daily life, they're almost kind of trying to be too West Endy and too arty and too whatever. And it just, anyway. Don't know why I felt the need to tell you that, but anyway, just to give you a picture. So we sit down and I explain about the podcast in detail, about kind of what it's been so far, and he's interested. He's asking all about it. So we've got 2 drinks each at this point. And I say, all right, can I ask you some questions for a future episode? And he says, yeah, on you go. So I ask Bill, can you tell me the biggest lesson that you've ever learned? And he just sort of looks at me. He's looking at me a bit like I'm mad. And I'm thinking, oh shit, I've got this wrong. I've asked like a really poor question. Oh no, I'm starting to like think, shit, I should have really had a better question than that. And then Bill's got a really thick Manchester accent. You know, like, I don't know how to do a Manchester accent, but it's that kind of Oasis vibes. Alright, mate, that kind of talks like this a little bit. I mean, that's absolutely offensive to anyone who lives in Manchester, but that's kind of what Bill sounds a bit like. Right, so Bill says, what a question that is. I don't even know where to start. And I said, okay, try. Takes a pause, takes a drink of his whiskey. It's kind of just like staring at me. I'm beginning to feel very uncomfortable. And he says, one of the lessons I try to teach every student is that you need to be asking the correct questions. If your questions are wrong, you're not going anywhere and you're never really going to get it right. So I ask him to kind of explain this a bit to me. And he says, well, it's like this. I see people and I teach people every day who just waddle through their day. Sometimes they just limp through their day. There's no energy. They've got no questions. He sort of says this as if that answers the question. So he stops and I said to him, I'm sorry, I don't want to sound like an idiot. I'm still not clear what you're talking about. I said, please just keep explaining that question thing to me. So he takes a big, massive, deep breath and he says, okay, well, when I was 17, I realised that if I'd stayed in Manchester at that age, I wouldn't have gone to study and I'd never have come to Glasgow. And what got me to coming to Glasgow and going to study was asking the right questions. And the question was, am I happy in this house with my mum, my dad and my brother? And then he just like stops talking. And I can see, do you know that look that people get in their eyes when they're talking to you, but they're kind of struggling to find the right way to say the thing that they actually want to say? And you can almost like strangely see them sort of rewording it in their mind. And he says, look, it's not that I ever want to put my family down for their choices, the choices they made. And it's not that I ever thought I was better than them. It's just, I asked myself if I was happy, and the answer was no. He says, when you hear from the inside, that's the real answer. And that's when you know you need to do something. At this moment, right, I clearly think I'm some sort of fucking Oprah Winfrey, right? I think I'm in interview mode. I think I'm like, I'm so the next Oprah. This is amazing. So I turn to Bill and I say, okay, but is any 17-year-old happy with their life? Or surely that's just a part of being 17 or 18. Isn't every person at that age feeling that the world is bigger than them and that they're wondering about where they can go in the future and what they can do? And he looks at me for a second and he says, "That's a really stupid question, Barry. You're not listening to me." So I got a wee bit offended. It totally shattered my Oprah moment where I thought I was being really amazing. And he says, "Look, I'll say it to you really clearly. At 17, I asked myself the scariest and most difficult question. And I listened for the answer." He says, "It's your inner animal talking to you. And that inner animal is telling you the truth." At this point, I'm wondering if Bill's had one too many whiskies and he's starting to lose the plot. But I'm like, okay, well, let's go with the inner animal chat, that conversation, right? Okay, we'll go with that, Bill, okay. So I push this a bit and I say, okay, tell me about the inner animal. And over the next 15 minutes, I just let him speak. And he tells me about all of the hard things that he's had to face up to in life. Those questions he has had to get right in himself and let his inner animal answer. So he says the inner animal told him to leave Manchester at age 17. It told him to divorce his wife at 22 because he had a sense that she was cheating, and he was right. He asked himself the question, do I need to write something fiercely political that's going to change the world? And the answer came back as yes. And so Bill moved to a tiny cottage in Devon, in England, where he lived for 6 months, writing a book, which he never finished. The book was called The Everyman World of Death. Cheery. I ask him, what's it about? And he says, well, it's a sort of guide to creating small political acts in everyday life. He abandoned the book after 6 months. Says he just lost faith in it, and he was sure that people wouldn't care about it. So he left his solitude and he moved back to Glasgow. So I said to Bill, but why did you give up on the book? Why did you move back to Glasgow? And he says, well, the inner animal told me to do it. So after a year of coming back, Bill had an experience that he says played quite a nasty part in his life. Bill was living in a flat and he started to notice some strange activity going on next door. And as he puts it, he asked his inner animal, should he go to the police because he's beginning to suspect that his neighbour might be a paedophile. He'd seen lots of young boys entering the house, and after a month he finally listened to the answer inside of himself and he called the police. Unbelievably, Bill managed to expose a horrible paedophile ring that was running out of his neighbour's house. Over 60 young boys had been abused. So he had to move house and he went into police protection for just over a year while it was investigated. So Bill, by this point, he's on about his 7th whiskey. He tells me that he asked his inner animal if he should ever remarry after the first failed attempt, and the answer was yes. So he'd met a woman called Tess at age 38. They married and they had kids quickly. He goes on to tell me that at round about 45, with his child only 7 years old, he went through a really difficult period with mental health, and after a sustained period of time off work, he was considering just leaving his family behind, just getting up one day and walking away. He tells me he was thinking about going to Belgium. He would just go to Belgium and be by himself. I asked him, okay, what stopped you doing that? And he says, the inner animal. He says the inner animal was shouting at me, don't be so stupid. He says that's the best advice he's ever received from himself. I say, what else? Because now I'm intrigued by this. I'm intrigued that Bill has built his whole life on this idea that actually you never ask anyone else the questions. You just ask yourself. Because if you want the truth, if you really want to know the answer, it's inside you all the time. You don't need to seek advice from other people. You don't need validation from anyone else. You just need to ask yourself the right question. So when I ask him what else, he pauses. And he does that weird thing again when he looks at me for a long time. And I can see he's forming in his mind once more. But something is difficult for him to say. So he goes a little bit quieter in his voice. And he says, I've had to ask myself recently one of the most difficult questions. And it's the one that I'm still waiting on the answer to, and I'm the most terrified to get. So I just go completely quiet at this point because I don't want to push him. I just want to let him speak. And he says, I've had to ask my inner animal if I'm an alcoholic. And then he just pauses and he looks at me. And I realise he's waiting for me to say something. So I say, and what was the answer? And he says, well, that was just between us. Me and the inner animal. At this point, Bill gets up, goes to the bar, gets another round. When he came back, we decided the interview was over. At the end of the night, right, so we left the pub. We walk out onto the street where we're both going to go, like, separate ways. I was going one way, he was going the other. He puts his arm around me and he kisses me on the cheek. And he is drunk by this point. And he says, Barry, you can use anything we talked about, but promise me this. You will always ask yourself the right questions. And off he goes. I can't thank Bill enough for that evening. Okay, on to the crazy world of the Extraordinary Stories podcast community questions. I asked, what would you be devastated to lose? 1. My children. 2. My eyesight. 3. My mind. 4. The ability to stop spotting a lying dickhead. 5. My dog, Sweet Pea. 6. My sense of humour. 7. My independence. 8. My energy. 9. My love of disco. 10. My mother's earrings. Okay, I'm going to hand you over to Sherry now. I asked questions. Love, loss, lessons, and Sherry offered me this.
Hey Barry, this is Sherry from Florida in the United States. You wanted to know some of the greatest lessons that I've learned. I guess to the short of it, I learned to not take abuse, whether it's emotional or physical, because I was abused as a teenager by a family member, by my brother, who was only a couple years older than me. I saw that he did a lot of stuff. He did a lot of drugs. He dropped out of school. He was not a good kid. He developed a lot of mental disease, which in his adult life he feels the government made up. So there's probably a deeper set of mental illness characteristics there. I don't know. I'm not a doctor, but he thinks they're all made up and he doesn't believe anything is real. Even though I fought with depression and manic, bipolar my whole life, or it used to be called manic depressive and now it's bipolar. So it's a struggle I still deal with every day. I have anxiety. I have a chronic illness called lupus, or SLE, which is an acronym for systemic lupus erythematosus. If I'm saying that correctly, I don't know. But that's what I have. But dealt with abuse as a teenager, learned how to be strong and self-sufficient at quite a young age. Was put out on the streets on my own at 18. I dropped out of high school so I could take care of my grandmother because she died when I was 18. And that's when Grandpa said, we're selling the house. So I learned how to be my own person pretty young, self-sufficient, but I didn't take any crap from men, and I kind of distanced myself. But I learned to open up, and I got comfortable in life, and everything was going well. Then hurricane came and took away my home, and that was 2004. And that was quite disturbing. The hurricane was quite disruptive in my emotional status, and I almost became suicidal again. I did try suicide when I was 13, but lucky for me, I didn't succeed, and I never really told anybody but therapists about it. At the time, I didn't think there was any other way out. But I overcame that, and living through that kind of made me stronger. And but another lesson, like I said, with the hurricane is you could lose almost everything you have, and you can't look at it as if it's the worst thing, because things could always be worse. That's kind of my motto nowadays. It could always be worse. I have air in my lungs and I'm on the side of the grass, if you know what I mean. But the hurricane came and took away my home. My relationship was a disaster at that time, so we split up and everything was just down. And then the next year, I actually met and fell in love with the man that would be my husband, and I've never been treated so good in my life. And after he found out what my brother had done when I was a teenager, he wanted nothing but vengeance, but it made me happy to just tell him, let it go. I'm a better person because of it. And it's hard to look at abuse and emotional abuse, physical abuse as a positive thing. But if you look at it as a negative thing, then you can't see the good that came from it. And the great thing that came from it was that I'm a strong person. And if I see somebody else getting bullied, I don't allow that to persist. I'll step in and say, this is not right. You can't allow this person to do that. He has no right. She has no right, what have you. And now I have an 11-year-old son who's in middle school now, and I try to teach him, don't let anybody do anything or say anything to you that makes you uncomfortable, because you don't have to tolerate that. He taught me patience, so there's a life lesson there. Patience via children. You never know how much patience you really have until you have a child. So I guess, it's not the lessons that I learned that taught me anything. It's the collective events of my life that taught me to be me.
Okay, and the final list that you're going to get from me. I asked, when did you, or didn't you, just say, fuck it, to the world and be happy in yourself? Number 1, when I decided to get sober. Number 2, I've never got there, but I'm still trying. Number 3, in my childhood, I was wild and uncivilized. Number 4, it's still a work in progress. Number 5, this morning, when I went out with no makeup and I just thought, fuck it, judge me bitches, I am living. Number 6, when I went through counselling. 7, after my divorce. Number 8, when I realised I was transgender. Number 9, when I went back to university. Number 10, at 50. It's a grand age. Fuck off, fuck no, fuck you. These are so handy to pull out in a conversation, especially when dressed up and wearing pedals. Okay, and so ends the love, loss, and lessons episode. Okay, wow, so a lot going on there, and again, I just can't thank you enough for getting in touch, for taking the time to get in touch with me. It's just incredible. This is what I love. I love starting a conversation. I love to chat. I love to hear from people. I love to hear the really real things that are going on. I think this process just reinforced for me two things. Two things that I know, but two things that I needed to just be reminded of. And those are, it's so important to listen and to listen well. And secondly, to trust your instincts. Trust your gut instincts, or your inner animal, as Bill would call it. Okay, so I'm on Facebook. Join the Facebook group. If you enjoyed any of those lists that you heard there, anything, you can get me on all social medias, Twitter, Instagram. I'm there. I'm on all of them. I'm on Patreon as well. Also, if you have a spare 10 seconds and you'd like to vote in the British Podcast Awards Listener's Choice category for me, that would be absolutely incredible. So that's the British Podcast Awards Listener's Choice category. You can vote for Extraordinary Stories Podcast. Okay, until the middle of the week, thank you for listening. Okay, goodbye.
It didn't affect me really one way or the other. I would imagine from the look on his face, let's get it on, let's do it, let's get it over. Let's get it on, let's do it, let's get it over. Let's get it on, let's do it, let's get it over.
Thanks a lot. Enjoy the podcast. I love it. Don't ever stop. Thanks, Barry. See ya.